Hi.
Hi, Mel. Hi, how are you? We're just going live now.
Let me just switch to my earphones.
Hi, Mel.
Okay.
Hi, Mel. I think you met both Christina and Tara a long
Hi.
time ago. Share copy.
What? Sorry.
Yeah, this is Christina and Tara. I think
I know. We met. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I am now going to actually I'm going to start recording.
Okay.
Computer.
Send me as usual.
Yeah, I've already sent the YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna tweet it right now.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Very good.
And let me just think what to do next. So next I'm gonna share my screen, but I can't find where. Yeah, here we go. Share screen, and I'm gonna share. Okay.
Hello.
Hi, hello. Yeah, yes, I think we're back. Okay.
Okay, we ready?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Sylvia Pan. I first met Sylvia in 2004 when she joined the Advanced Masters on Virtual Environments at University College London. And then she did a project with me. And then from that, we went on to do a PhD, which she finished in 2009 in the normal time that it takes. And this a lot of this was on virtual characters, which she'll talk about today. After that, she became a postdoc in the computer science department at UCL and then moved to cognitive neuroscience at UCL. She's now a assistant professor, lecturer in virtual reality at Goldsmiths, University of London. She's worked on VR, therefore, for about 15 years. And in the past 2 years alone, she's received $1 million research funding from AHRC, which is a UK grant awarding body. And this is AHRC and Innovate UK, and it's in this same area of immersive technology. She also notably led in 2017, together with Marco Gillies, a Coursera specialization in virtual reality, which has so far had around 30,000 learners. Last thing I'd like to mention is that a couple of years ago, she published a paper with Antonia Hamilton on why and how to use virtual reality to study human social interaction. This was in the British Journal of Psychology. And already since then, it's had around 100 citations. As usual, Sylvia is not only giving the talk today, but she's like the master of ceremonies behind the scenes. And today she's also helped by Christina Dobre and Tara Collingwood-Williams, both also from Goldsmiths, University of London. So with that, I now pass over to Sylvia to give her talk on virtual characters from training to immersive gaming.
Thanks a lot, Mel. Yeah, so this is really quite stressful because I am running everything off my own machine. So I think I need to get the orders right. I'm going to share my screen first. I'm making sure I check all the boxes, and then share, and then I play my keynote. So hopefully everything is all good. Oh, I can still see the webinar chat, which is good news. Okay, cool. So hopefully everything is fine. Right. Well, thanks, Mel. Thanks a lot for the introduction, and also thanks a lot for actually introducing me to VR when I came to the UK in 2004, and I did my master project with Mel, which then led to a PhD. And actually, the avatar I have here on the left-hand side, which is the very first avatar created in 2005. And at the time, she was actually, the aim of the story behind her is actually want to create an avatar who is very sort of good looking and who can bring a sort of positive experience to participants in VR. And that's basically kind of the state of art in research at the time in virtual characters. And fast forward 11 years later, 2016, and this is actually, I no longer work format at the time, but actually this avatar was also created in Mel's lab. It's a photogrammetry recreation of myself. And that this is no longer the state of art avatars now. Now we're like 4 years after that. And this is relatively sort of small budget production as well. So I just really want to show that in the past 20 years, we really have improved a lot in our ability in creating realistic looking and believable virtual characters. And what this means is that our ability to create realistic, expressive, and responsive virtual humans made it really possible for us to have a meaningful social interaction in VR. And this is really why I am so excited about virtual reality since about 15 years ago. So these are some of the work I've done in the past. In particular, the AI character for immersive gaming is a sort of more recent work. So here I just really want to share my 15 years of experience working with virtual humans, in particular using VR, so that we can better understand the way in which they will be part of our life in the years to come. Because I'm sure every one of you would have noticed that we see more and more virtual characters, being some kind of part of role in our life now. So the very first one, I just want to show you very briefly my master project, which was also the project I worked on during my PhD. And since, for this Frontier talk series Mel has led, like everyone so far seems to kind of go back to the sort of good old days of 20 years ago, how VR is like. So I'm going to follow that as well. So before I show you this video, I just want to, explain this. This happens in the cave-like system. If you went to Carolina's talk last week, you will know what that is. Actually, I'm just going to show you the video first, and I'll explain the technicalities behind it. And just make sure you pay attention to his body movement.
That shirt looks great on you. How much was it?
I think it was about £20. It's quite cheap. Thank you very much, though. You look very nice too.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, so as you can see, his body, he was swinging his body quite a lot while he was talking to this virtual character, which really shows that he's really in it. He's really in the experience. He's really enjoying it, which was the purpose of why we created this scenario anyway. So he's enjoying it so much. He actually went up all the way to the back wall of the cave-like system we have in order to get closer to her. But what he didn't know is actually we programmed our virtual character to maintain a social distance from him. So the more he actually pushed towards the virtual character, the further back the virtual character stepped back, maintaining that social distance. And there were other things we did as well. We programmed the virtual characters to be looking at him while talking to him, and looking away every now and then, following whatever is in the literature in psychology. Right. So this was created in a cave-like system at UCL, and we used Dive for the VR system. We used Piavica. These were like basically 4 projectors producing the image at the same time. So we had a cluster machine. So lots of different levels of programming and engineering work involved to actually just get an experience like this to work. And nowadays you can easily probably just do a mock-up of that in 10 minutes in Unity. So we're really at a very different time for VR research now, and this is super exciting for me. So what I really want to show with this experience is that even with super simple animations, so in this case the avatars were animated with keyframe animation, and they all look quite cartoon-like as well. But actually still, this gives the participant a very different experience from watching a movie or playing a game. And I really feel this is an experience that's enabled by VR that is not really possible with other media. So my next question I want to answer is, let's see. Okay, so what is actually virtual reality and how does it differ from other media? So first I want to show you, when I talk about VR, I meant immersive VR. We're all kind of very used to sort of the HMD, 6 degree of freedom HMD, like Oculus or Vive. But also lots of my work happened in the cave-like system. And in level of immersion, I would say these two are very similar to each other. And both systems, very importantly, they support a set of illusions which are really critical in VR. And the first one is place illusion. As you can see that when this participant turn her head around, the display updates according to where she's looking at. So basically she sees things in stereo, she had her head tracked 6 degree of freedom, so when she looks around, the images updates. And also she has a really wide field of view. In particular with HMDs, she's completely surrounded by this virtual stimuli rather than anything that's in the real life will remind her what real life is. And this creates a really, really strong feeling. If you ever tried VR, you will know what I'm talking about. And this, as defined by Miles Slater, is called place illusion. It's a strong illusion of being somewhere, being the digital world rather than the real one. And the second illusion, which is also very important, is the plausibility illusion. I'm just going to quickly play this video.
You're usually at ease when talking to someone of the opposite sex.
Say it again?
You're usually at ease when talking to someone of the opposite sex.
Oh, don't really have to ask these questions.
It would be nice if you could, yeah.
I disagree.
You try to avoid talking to people unless you know them well.
No, I disagree.
If the chance comes to meet new people, you often take it.
Well, it depends on who they are, but I agree, I suppose.
So basically, he had a set of questions he's reading from the computer screen, but everything else basically come from his own. And the avatar was animated with motion capture data. She's a bit more realistic looking than the other avatar. So this work was actually done in 2009. So we're kind of still state of art for research at the time. So I really want to use this video to show you the power of plausibility illusion, which this I think is a good example. Plausibility illusion basically means that events that happen in VR that actually correlate your action and actually relates very personally to you. So this is kind of quite a personal conversation they're having here. And then these two illusions are really really fundamental to VR. So going back to the definition of VR, really say, like as Mel defined in 2009, there are really 3 illusions that are the most important in VR. And Mel has spent lots of time last Monday on embodied illusions, so I'm not going to mention anything here. But basically, the 2 important illusions I want to focus on is place illusion and plausibility illusion, right? And these 2 illusions are actually slightly different because place illusion actually happens at a perceptual level, where plausibility illusion happens at a cognitive level. It's a cognitive illusion. And what do I mean by that? Let me show you an example, a homemade video. Hopefully it works. So if I ask you which one of these is longer, and if I ask you again, which one of these is longer, right? So basically everyone actually have them here. So if I show you these 2 pieces of wood together, you see they're exactly the same size. But if I put them like this, most people will have the strong illusion that this one is longer than the other one. But if I swap them again, you will have the same illusion again. Whichever is in this position give you the illusion that it is the longer one, right? So basically this has to do with how our brain actually processes visual data. So it's like, even if you know very clearly that these 2 are exactly the same size, but you can't stop feeling that this one is longer, whichever positions here is longer, right? So it is a typical example of how bottom up and top down sort of visual processing actually work with each other. And the important thing is that even when the illusion breaks, when I put them together, they're the same, but then when I put them back, easily I bring the illusion back up quickly. So that's what place illusion is about. But then there's another illusion which is also really important in VR, which is a plausibility illusion, which is very different one because it happens at a cognitive level. It's a cognitive illusion. So here is just some sort of example I found randomly online about when the conversation goes wrong with an AI chatbot, right? So if an AI chatbot starts behaving in a way that reminds you that, oh, this is just some computer algorithm, and the moment that happens, you no longer feel the rapport. You no longer feel that you're relating to this bot. You no longer feel there's a real human being actually behind the bot, right? So so basically plausibility illusion works the same way. When it breaks, it will take a long time to actually have it back. So in VR, I feel that the place illusion were kind of already there in a sense that lots of the consumer device out there, Oculus Quest being one of the most popular one now, they support this place illusion to some extent. That's good enough for lots of applications we have here. But what really needs more work now is this plausibility illusion. It's the illusion of the events in VR are real and are really relating to you personally. And a lot of the work I have done is really about thinking about different ways and work with people in different areas to make sure we have this plausibility illusion as strong as possible. Okay, so I'm just actually going to show you some examples of work we have done in this area with my work in medical doctor training. So now I'm going to kind of step away from VR for a second, because for this work, we really worked with medical doctors in really understanding the problem they want to solve before moving on to VR. So we basically, I want to show you 2 pieces of work. One is about unreasonable patient demand for antibiotics. Another one is child safeguarding concerns. So for the antibiotics work, why it is a problem. So we all know that we shouldn't use antibiotics when it's not necessary, because the more we use it, the more likely we will have superbugs, which are antibiotic resistant bugs. And if we don't do anything by 2050, superbugs will kill about 10 million people a year. So there's really a big problem. However, it is sort of, we just say then we should really stop prescribing antibiotics. We really should use it whenever it's necessary, but it's easier said than done. And actually, in all countries across the globe, this is a big problem. Medical doctors turn to overprescribe antibiotics. So especially in the UK, very often GP prescribe antibiotics when it's not necessary. And the reason behind it is GPs often find prescribing antibiotics. GPs often find it's really difficult to say no when someone just come forward and asking you for antibiotics. So here, basically, our idea is that can we actually use VR as a training tool for GP to go through the experience, so that when they're dealing with real patients, they'll be at a better position in actually telling them, no, you're not getting it, right? Okay, so we have designed a VR scenario, and the medical doctors will be using the Oculus. I think that's DK2, because it has the actual position tracker there. So you're a medical doctor, you put a headset on, and you will have a mother and her daughter coming in. And the old woman is with a cough, but then she doesn't actually have enough medical reasons for you to prescribe antibiotics, but the daughter is very angry and she's really arguing for it, which is something GP medical doctors often see in the UK. So in order to actually make sure that we maintain the plausibility illusion, we use the method called Wizard of Oz. So here, we're not using any clever AI. I mean, we do have sort of eye gaze and all this kind of background sort of algorithm happening at the background, but in terms of actual so the conversation is actually manipulated, controlled by this control panel. So we have a research assistant who is trained. Typically, they will spend about a day to get used to this interface and to really, be quick enough in selecting which sentences to say. And they'll be triggering the button from a control panel. But also, I really need to mention that it took us about, I think, at least 2 months to design the actual application, the interface, as well as the scripts. And we went through it over and over again to make sure that it is really a script that will work in a situation like that. Okay, so I'm just now going to show you a video clip of how it actually works.
My mother had exactly the same thing last year.
Right.
It started just like this. A couple of days of sore throat, then a cough. But then she became really very ill with a high temperature fever. I had to take a day off work to take her to the hospital. They gave her antibiotics and she immediately got better. So all she needs is some antibiotics this time.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. But what we often see is with this kind of illness, things settle down by themselves. In the most case. It sounds like you had a bad experience last time, but I think it would be worth trying some simple treatments like painkillers and some fluids and some rest first.
I'll just ask your daughter if she knows about whether you've been coughing up any phlegm or not. Do you know?
Why do we need to wait until things get worse? Her immune system is not very strong, as you can see. There's no point letting her suffer through this. All we need is some antibiotics.
Sure, no, I understand that, and if the reason I'm asking these extra questions, and I know you're in a hurry, but the reason I'm asking these questions is because actually, very often, a cough is caused by a virus rather than a bacteria.
Even if it is just a virus, isn't it better that we give her some antibiotics to help her immune system?
Well, unfortunately, that's not how antibiotics work. They don't. They don't boost the immune system.
Please, can you give us the antibiotic prescription now? And we will only use it if things get worse.
As I say, I don't think that's necessary right now. Sometimes we can do delayed prescriptions, but I've examined your mum right now and she looks fine to me, and I think this is a virus.
Doctor, maybe you can give us the prescription, but we will only collect it if my mum gets worse.
Okay, it seems like that's something you're both absolutely fixed on having. We can arrange for a prescription that you can pick up tomorrow or the next day if things are getting worse.
Reassuring as I can, I do not think that there is...
This is so unfair. It's going to ruin our holiday. I'm going to take this up with the local health authority. I think you are unfairly denying medicine to my mother.
Okay, I appreciate your concern. Thank you for your feedback. I do think that the best medical practice at the moment is to manage this conservatively for now.
My mother worked and paid national health insurance all her life. Now look at what's happening.
Sure, I mean, this has got in no way to do with your mother's health insurance payouts. I believe this is the best medical practice at the moment for your mum. I think the use of antibiotics in terms of the risk and the side effects that they can produce, such as resistance to future chest infections or problems with the stomach, mean that it's probably better to not prescribe them and to seek medical attention in France should things get worse, which I'm not expecting.
Okay.
As I've explained before, chest pain, shortness of breath, or a change in the colour.
So before I go to the next slide, I just want to, before I review the result, I just want to explain that we basically ran this experiment with 9 trainee GPs and 12 GPs. And so they know that they didn't have real patients in front of them. They know all these patients are actually virtual, and they know that it is a clear medical case where you shouldn't prescribe antibiotics should these patients be real. They also know that they have been watched for, they have been observed by somebody else in the room. They've been videotaped, and they know basically, they shouldn't be prescribing antibiotics, and they're being watched to see how they can, do so. But basically, still, our result shows that out of the 9 trainee GPs, when we go back to the video data to actually look at what they have done, none of the trainee GPs managed to say no. And 4 out of the 12 experienced GPs managed to say no in the end. So this basically shows that at least we were able to really create an environment which is difficult for the GPs to resist. We really managed to recreate this kind of the stress level that GPs often experience in real life to some extent. We have some comments. It felt stressful as I felt the characters were putting me under pressure to make a decision to prescribe. Really useful for testing how you respond to difficult situations. Will be useful to try again using different consultation techniques. Frequently see patients demanding a particular treatment who won't take no for an answer. So this was a study with only 21 medical doctors, but it really kind of convinced us ourselves and lots of medical doctors we're working with that VR could potentially be a really useful tool for training in this area. So we then conducted a sort of larger scale study on the topic of child safeguarding. So first of all, let's go back to the actual issue, child safeguarding. It's a very heavy-hearted topic. We don't have to talk about the importance of child safeguarding issues, and any member of the public actually should raise concerns immediately if they think a child have been abused at home. And actually, in practice, in the UK, the A&E doctors are often are basically they have guidelines on this and take any child injury really seriously. Whenever there's a child ended up at hospital with any sort of body injury, they really go through a set of questions to make sure to rule out there's any sort of suspicion on this way. However, not all child abuse victims ended up in the A&E. And actually, lots of children are suffering from minor injuries or even psychological abuse rather than physical abuse. So in order to really sort of having an understanding of or try to intervene as soon as possible, and actually the frontline workers, the medical doctors, GP, general practitioners in the UK, they're like the family doctors in the US. They're the ones who would have the opportunity to actually interact with a family and try to observe if there's anything goes wrong. So basically, GPs have the responsibility, have great responsibility in sort of ruling out any suspicion in this area whenever they see a patient. But this is something really, really hard to practice in real life. And for medical doctors, they go through something called simulation. And by simulation here, they actually mean going through a practice with a real actor. They don't mean digital simulation, they mean a sort of acted situation. But actually in this situation, you can't actually tell a child actor to act as if they have been abused. It's just not ethically possible. And that's why we think virtual reality could provide a really interesting alternative to explore this area. So we created this scenario where we had a father with a complicated medical problem, and he came with his child who has been showing signs of being abused. And we didn't actually just make up the signs of the child being abused. We actually worked with Professor Caroline Fertimer, who is a consultant pediatrician. She is also the co-author of the Child Protection Practice Manual. So she's really the world leading expert on this. So together with her, we created animations like this. Let me just show you this video.
He'll be quiet, right, Tom? Tom, sit here. I don't know what's going on in this boy's head.
Okay, so this is basically is what the medical doctors see when they come into the scenario, and we want to see to which extent they will be able to actually spot the abuse cues. And also different from the previous experiment, we actually went back to the cave-like system. And this is partially because the medical doctors in the previous experiment, an antibiotics experiment, they said that one of the complaints they have is that normally in a sort of everyday consultation, they would have access to a computer, where it is still not possible with what we're trying to do here inside VR, because the resolution for HMDs is just not good enough. And we don't want to go through the complications of having to implement a virtual computer in VR as well. So, but we have access to the UCL cave-like system, so we just conducted the experiment there, and the medical doctors actually had access to a laptop in the cave.
I just really need to talk to you about what to do about my, I can't remember the name of the valve. One of them now.
Aortic
It's a bit sticky, they say.
And what treatment options?
I don't really understand my options, so I've got to make a decision now, like this week. Otherwise I'll miss my slot, you know what I mean?
One option is to have surgery through the chest to replace the valve, and one is
yeah, that's open heart surgery.
Exactly.
Open me up.
Exactly. And the other option is to try and replace the valve through a with less invasive, as we call it, so through a catheter into the heart, which they they don't have to cut you open. So that might be a better option.
Yeah, that's the leg one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
What's the worst that could happen if I do the open heart surgery?
Cool. Worst that could happen with any procedure like that is that you, well, worst can happen obviously is you don't survive it, and open heart surgery.
That's why it's important.
Am I going to die if I go to open heart surgery?
I don't think any cardiologist would recommend it if they thought you were definitely going to die at all. If I could I? Dad, I need to wait. Dad, I really need to do that.
For Christ's sake, we're having an important conversation here, you little shit. Tom can hold on, can't we? Just cross your legs. This is far more important.
I don't mind if Tom wants to go to the loo and then you can bring him back.
Hello, mate. Trying to get on with you for an age.
Tom?
Yeah, good. The doctor just told me I might die.
Hi, Tom.
Do you still feel like you need the loo? Nah.
Who else is at home with you, Tom?
I have a sister Mia.
Your sister Mia? Right, okay.
She's 4.
She's 4, is she? Right. So you and your sister, you live with your dad, do you?
Yes.
And how are you? I think your dad was a little bit.
Oh, so it stopped here. Okay. Fine. Oh, sorry. Okay.
I just really need to talk to you.
Okay, fine. So basically, most of you probably can already see that the way the father treats the son is just, obviously there's something wrong going on, right? And but that apparently that is, but the thing is, for the medical doctors, they're actually also dealing with a very complex medical situation that the father actually had at the moment. So they're actually cognitively very much loaded. So although they might have also detected this kind of abnormality happening in this relationship, but they might not have the cognitive capacity to actually, pay attention to this enough so that they actually type it down in the medical notes, because that's what essentially what counts when you actually come to child safeguarding, right? It's basically whatever notes you type in on the computer will then be reviewed, will then be sort of documented. And if she managed to, or he managed to flag up something in the notes, this situation will then be addressed, right? So basically, what we did here is we get the notes each doctor have typed up right after the consultation, and we got 10 independent raters to look at the notes and give them a between 0 to 100 score for how do they think their awareness of child safeguarding issues and the development of some strategy to address these concerns. Right. And we also collected other independent variables, the doctor's experience, the stress level, and their big 5 personality. So what we found is actually we didn't find any correlation. Actually, we have it here. We don't have any correlation between GPs and trainees, which is different from our antibiotic study. But we did find some interesting results with stress level. There's a perceived stress level, as well as their big 5 personality score. So basically what we found is that x-axis here is notes, right? So the higher, the better. The y-axis is their perceived stress scale. So the higher, the more stressed they actually report themselves feel, right? So in this case, there is a significant negative correlation. This means that the more stressed the medical doctor actually report they're feeling, the more poor quality their notes is, the less likely they're able to address this potential child abuse issues properly in their notes, which is a really important finding. It means that when medical doctors are overworked, they're stressed, they're really just not doing a job that is really good enough for issues like this. And also we look at the big 5 personality correlation as well. So if you can just pay attention to these 3 measures which are significant. So basically, medical doctors who have a higher level of agreeableness are likely to be performing better. Also, the ones who are more extroverted and the ones who are less neurotic. Right. So that's kind of our interesting result from our 63 participants we were able to find with this study. We have some comments as well from participants. They felt impressed. They felt they were evoked a sense of discomfort, which is difficult to do in an artificial setting. They feel that we definitely have the potential to be a training tool, particularly with regards to difficult consultation or breaking bad news, etc. And they also mentioned this VR could have a role in easing med students into training consultation skills, perhaps without being observed, as a private tool to carry out consultations, and then watch yourself back and observe. So basically, yeah, so medical students, they're very used to actually practicing or going through exams with another actor. But some of them might find it actually slightly difficult. So maybe VR can be something they can practice over and over again, and then to get themselves ready so that when they get to practice with a real actor, they can be performing better. Right, so conclusion. So hopefully I've managed to convince you that VR in this case is very useful for research and training for medical doctor communications. Not only we find really interesting results, but we will also to understand, for instance, the relationship between their personality trait and how well they perform in a situation like that, which will be otherwise difficult to study in a real life setting. And also, here, the place illusion and plausibility illusion are really, really important for participants to actually learn these skills. Because here, when you're talking about training and therapy, you are talking about recreating a real life scenario so that whatever skills they learned in VR, they can then apply them back in their real life situations. So future work, obviously, the second piece of work is similar to the first one. We developed a big control panel, went over and over again for about 2 or 3 months time to make sure we have all the script designed as perfect as possible. And then we have to train an assistant at least for a day for them to know which button to actually press. But I don't think we're very far from autonomous, making the whole process autonomous. I think there are 2 elements. So first, I would like to be able to have automated sentence selection, but that is actually not that hard because we already have the database of in the second experiment, 63 participants going through this situation. So we have basically the research assistant selecting, the best response from the control panel 63 times. And I believe with this data, if I can, work with someone who knows about language processing, then, I think we have the data, we can basically produce that quite easily. So anyone interested in working with me on that, please drop me an email. And secondly, is something slightly more tricky is I think the next step is really about creating more rapport between the medical doctor and the avatar, the agent. So basically for now, obviously the agent has eye contact with the medical doctor, but there's not much more than that, which is happening, so driven by the algorithm automatically. So what we we're hoping to do, and also medical doctor kind of suggested as well, is that, for instance, maybe the doctor who are really paying attention to the patients, to the virtual patients, if they're really engaged in the conversation, maybe they should be rewarded in a way that the virtual patient can also be more engaging as well. So I think that is actually something that we want to do next. And actually, we have already sort of been doing some of this with our current project on AI character for immersive gaming. So basically, we recently had a Innovate UK grant, and we were able to work with 2 game companies, Maze Theory and Dream Reality Interactive, with Russ Helling and Dr. Dave Rinyard. And it was a project by Marco Gillas and myself, and Christina Dobrev, who is a PhD student, is hired to actually be the AI programmer for this project as well. So basically, this project is about creating the AI character for the Peaky Blinders VR game. And the Peaky Blinders, I think this is actually a really interesting TV series. Like, if you are British living in the UK, 90% you know what Peaky Blinders is, and you probably love them very much as well. But if you're not from the UK, the chances are you've never heard of them. So this is almost like a question you can ask someone to tell how British they are. So we were really, privileged, obviously, to work with creatives who actually working on something so prestigious. So the task we have here is basically to combine immersive gaming with character-driven narrative games. And both, I think, are quite mature kind of consumer products, right? So just want to show you this video, immersive gaming. Oops, sorry. Does it work? Okay, it doesn't work. Fine. Right, so this is basically, someone playing Beat Saber. If you haven't tried the game, is a fantastic game. But basically, it's very immersive, and you're just slashing all these sort of cubes, and it's very satisfying. But at the same time, there's also this kind of game, character-driven narrative game, which most of the time you play on the game console or on the PC, right? And again, it's very fascinating. The graphics very fascinating. The animation, lots of them are really well done. But what really kind of doesn't really work for me is that when you're having a nice conversation with a character in this kind of game, whenever the character asks you a question, you have to answer, there is a sort of drop-down menu just popped out, which you have to then select what you say. And for me, basically, this is where the kind of whole interaction actually breaks. So basically, going back to what we produced before, the interaction like this, this guy is really enjoying the conversation. He's really sort of fully engaged in the conversation, to a sort of situation like, when you have a drop-down menu where you actually have to select what you say next. So for me, the second one really breaks the plausibility illusion, which again, if you remember what I said, is a cognitive illusion. And once it breaks, is really, for me, it's no longer VR, right? So you're not actually, you're actually losing the illusion. You're really losing a lot of the magic that VR actually brings you. So you're not really using the full capacity of VR in this case. Right. So basically, we're trying to sort of, see how we can grab this kind of gaming experience and make it actually work in immersive VR and try to really maintain the plausibility illusion. So we started this project. We were, really sort of meeting the game companies regularly, and we kind of learned a lot from each other. So basically, all the work we've done before is kind of, in the lab, and now we actually are confronted with a real world problem. So first, we were told actually we shouldn't expect the players to talk, right? So normally, we do most players of current computer games, either console, unless you're playing with someone online, you're sort of talking to each other. But if you're playing with an agent, a sort of non-player character, the assumption is that you are not actually going to have a conversation with this person. And, maybe in the future, this will be the commonplace, but as it is now, we can't really expect the players to talk. And we don't even know if the player will be standing or sitting down while playing this game. But at the same time, we actually can't afford whatever we do that fail to work, because we need to actually, it's a small game studio we're working with. We can't actually afford producing something that doesn't work. We can just, label it as research project. No, what we do actually have to actually go into the game, which will be published. So yeah, so lots of interesting challenges to start with. So basically we came up with the idea that, okay, fine, the user don't have to be talking. We can have the agent talking, and the agent can be giving a monologue, can be going through like a really sort of emotion, sort of also eventful piece of sort of conversation, piece of monologue she's going through, and the user is just there listening, right? But we can somehow capture the user's listening behavior and make the agent actually react towards the user's listening behavior. So the idea is that if the user is really engaged in listening, then the agent can be maybe revealing a bit more information to the user. But if the user is not, then the agent become a bit more hostile as well. Sorry. So another thing I want to mention before going to what exactly we did is also this paradigm of active and this difference between active and passive inputs. So in the first video, which unfortunately doesn't work, is someone playing Beat Saber. He sees a block coming out. He uses his hand to actively, slash the cubes. Where in the second one, right, there were lots of implicit sort of body language the user is using, right? So we can tell from his body language he's really enjoying this conversation, right? So actually in the current sort of device people use, there were lots of passive input people use as well. For instance, Fitbit, like the Apple Watch, which captures your heart rate and everything, that is passive inputs, right? So basically in VR, we can capture a lot of these passive inputs and think about ways of how we turn this passive input into something useful, something we can actually use to make the virtual agent more reactive, more believable, and more empathic. So, so basically in VR, with the current consumer devices, we get this set of input. From the user, we have a head 6 degree of freedom input. Also from both hands, we have 6 degree of freedom as well. We also have the microphone input. And from this input, we can easily have access to where is the users looking at in relation to the agent they're talking to? How far are they away from the agent? Are they moving a lot, or are they relatively still? Are they nodding or shaking their heads? Are they sort of in sync with the agent in any way? Right. So basically, this set of features, if you give it to a psychologist, then they will say, hey, basically, with these features, you'll be able to detect real-time of the, you'll be able to do real-time detection of user engagement level. Right. So basically, you will be able to see how engaged the user is in real time with this sort of features we were able to get in real time with consumer VR devices. Okay. So basically, that's exactly what we did. And yeah, and I also must say that actually from this set of features to real-time detection of engagement level doesn't just come straightforward, because although it's very easy for a human expert to look at these features in real time and say, hey, he is engaged, oh no, he's not engaged, but it's more difficult to tell a computer to actually be able to copy what a human being is actually doing. So here we came up with this way, which is sort of in the line of imitation learning, to actually solve this problem. So basically here we have the virtual agent who is giving a monologue, and we have the user who is tracked feeding sort of his head and hand position in real time to the system. And then Christina, who is the one we're working on the project, she is the human observer of this situation. So she recorded the sort of social interaction between the user and the agent, and then she replayed them in VR. This is just a photo I got of her in the HTC Vive. Doesn't mean that she has to be like that when she's labeling the data. Yeah, but you get a point. So she's looking at the interaction, and for each, for every now and then, she will press a button of saying, hey, the user is engaged or the user is not engaged. So we have the user data. We also have the label of the user data from a human agent. And we give all this to the machine learning model. We also give, whatever is happening in the virtual environment to the machine learning model as well. So in case, maybe the virtual agent is moving their body, is the user actually sort of somehow in sync with the body of the virtual agent on that. So we throw this data to the machine learning model as well as a label. So the machine learning model can then learn to sort of copy Christina's choices. So now with a trained model, we can now get new data, we get participants who are interacting with the agent, and hopefully now we give this two data to the machine learning model. The machine learning model can then output the label to try to predict how Christina would have made her choice in whether the user is engaged or not. And then in real time, this sort of prediction will happen in real time. Then the machine learning model will tell the agent, hey, this person who is interacting with you is really engaged. So if you want to get him more engaged, do whatever you just did again or something. That's our kind of next step now. Right, so that's basically what we did with sort of creating a sort of virtual agent and making it more emotional, whatever you call it, in real time, working with the constraint of consumer devices, as well as, sort of we're looking at actually the gamer community rather than running experiments in the lab. Finally, I don't have much time, but I just also want to mention, these four basically application areas are really the four applications area I'm really passionate about. So I talked about social anxiety psychotherapy, medical doctor training, AI character for immersive gaming, but I've also done lots of work with Professor Antonia Hamilton on neuroscience research. And typically, we have a setup like this. This is not fully immersive VR, but we have later work where we have the HMD devices for the participant to wear as well. So basically, we're collecting lots of behavior data in, how people typically react to virtual characters and how certain sort of social behavior the virtual character might do that will change the way, in a very subtle sort of level, people would react to them. And we're basically very interested in how, for instance, neurotypical people will behave in front of an avatar comparing to ASD participants. And there are, I think this is a really exciting area. There are lots of fantastic researchers in this area. And I think their result will also sort of feed back in to this immersive agent work we're doing as well, because part of VR, part of this kind of virtual character research is really about understanding real human psychology. And as Mel mentioned, we have a paper published in British Journal of Psychology. I think I got this screenshot a long time ago. So now we have a citation about 100. So if you're a psychologist and you're interested in using VR, I think this paper hopefully will be a good starting point. Right, so these are the four areas I briefly talked about. A quick summary, I think virtual humans in VR, there's really very much point for these two things to actually sort of work together. So first of all, 6-degree of freedom VR display supports place illusion, right? So it really gives the opportunity to really experience co-presence, being together with somebody. But at the same time, you should really also remember that VR is not only a display system, it's also give you 6-degree of freedom tracking, which gives you really rich and high dimensional user inputs, which you should use it to try to support plausibility illusion. And I think we're still relatively kind of at the beginning of this journey in terms of research. Finally, I also want to talk about a little bit about believable virtual characters. So I think, in research, we pretty much know, I think talking about virtual characters, I think about the fidelity of virtual characters. We never just talk about visual or motion fidelity. We normally talk about visual and motion fidelity separately. But what I want to say here is that for visual fidelity, we can actually already do really well. This avatar, I think she came from maybe 5-10 years ago, right? So we can basically create a really realistic virtual human model, no problem. But the problem is how far we can go in terms of animation, right? So in this case, the avatar of myself is animated, I think, with procedure generated animation, so kind of physical simulation, but mocap data also works with her. But if I apply, for instance, keyframe animation on a photorealistic avatar like the first one or second one, it will just make you feel creepy. So there's really a balance between visual and motion fidelity you should be looking at here. If you only have access to keyframe animation, then you probably stick to cartoon-like avatars like Pixar does. But if you have more sort of photorealistic avatars, then you should, if you have capacity to do motion capture, then you can think about using photorealistic avatars. So there's really a balance. So your capacity in animating the virtual character really defines how far you should go in terms of visual fidelity. And I think when it goes to interactivity, in order to really maintain the plausibility illusion, in order to really make the user feel that the avatar, they're not just someone observing an avatar, but actually they're participating, they're interacting with this avatar. I think interactivity also caps, how far you should go. So maybe if you can only go so far interactivity, maybe you shouldn't use realistic avatar. You probably just should sort of be low on all three measures. But I think there's the dimension between the three, I think, is really for future research. And finally, I also want to make the point that I think virtual humans in VR is a highly collaborative area. You need to work with good engineers who really understand how to put different systems together. You need a good Unity or Unreal programmer. You also need to work with AI researchers in order to make the avatar really sort of react towards the user. And with machine learning algorithms, we do actually take quite a lot of computational power as well. So you might actually want to, in the future, work with high performance computing experts to sort of somehow make it quicker. And it's really, really important to work with psychologists, neuroscientists, and also creatives, right? So we work with artists in our last project, and we learned so much from them. And also, whatever application you're working on, really go out and talk to domain experts. Like in my case, I spoke to medical doctors, and we're also working with some bioscientists to try to understand how to use VR for data visualization. So I think this is, again, a really collaborative area. You can create fantastic VR experiences on your own, but it will benefit so much if you actually go out and talk to people from different areas with different expertise. And this is really how I think the future of VR in this area will be. And finally, advertisement time, we have this Coursera course, which Mel has mentioned. We have about 30,000 learners already. And we also run a Encompass MA/MSc virtual and augmented reality course, which I think some of the students are here listening in as well on YouTube, which is great. And here is a slide of most of my collaborators that I mentioned, including my PhD students. And finally, I want to actually end the talk with this slide, which is by chance. I realized actually today we have Christina and Tara helping us, putting sort of questions from YouTube to the talk, and Mel hosting it. And this is actually the picture of four of us. 2018 December, a year and a half ago, and it's really great to work with you again, although I can't see you, which is quite strange, but I look forward to being able to go back to restaurants and meet you in person, hopefully soon. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can find how to do that. I lost my mouse. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna bring Mel back.
Hi, thanks very much for showing my pre-lockdown haircut in that last photo. So thanks for a very absorbing talk, and I think the arguments you put forward are very plausible, and I hope people follow them up. And also, I just remind people that you're one of the associate editors of Frontiers in Virtual Reality in the behavior section. So if you send in your paper, Sylvia may be one of the people who looks after it. So thanks very much. We have time for questions now. After about 10-15 minutes, I will check with Sylvia that you can still carry on. But at the moment, let's say questions for about 15 minutes and stop if you want then. Okay. So the first question I saw come in during the talk was from Vino Vinayagamurthy, and she says, what are your favorite tools for creating virtual characters currently? Can you say something about your pipeline and workflow?
Yeah, actually, well, at the moment, obviously, Unity and whatever avatar is available on Unity. I know Mara and Anthony, they have this new library of avatar, Rocketbox avatars. I look forward to working with them again. But actually, my most recent work, I've been working with people from the creative industry recently quite a lot. So I basically have to follow whatever pipeline or workflow they have. So working, because they probably have lots of in-house development or whatever software they use. So yeah, that's yeah, I think that probably answers that question. I'm going to label it as
Okay, and then also carrying on from Vino, she said that in the medical training scenario, I noticed that the doctor is talking as if it were a normal conversation. What was the protocol for getting the doctors used to the system, and what was the protocol afterwards? Were doctors debriefed to show them where they went wrong?
Yeah, so I'll answer the first one first. So first, medical doctors are all superbly good at doing this. So they actually, for the second experiment, they actually have a certification of continuous professional development. So basically medical doctors, they are very used to practicing their sort of interpersonal skills this way, right? So that's just something they do with real actors. So for them, this is just like practicing with another actor. So that's basically hopefully answers the first half. And the second one, debrief, yes. So we actually do a playback. We record everything in real time, and then we do a playback, and we go through the playback with the medical doctors. And so they have an opportunity to make comments on what they did and what they were thinking about, obviously after they've done all the questionnaires and stuff.
Thanks. Fabio Solari asks, how long does it take to get plausibility in? That is, to be sure that the behavior of doctors was like in reality in the experiment on antibiotics, for example?
Well, I think, it's forever. Like you can always improve what you can do within, the current technical capacity you have, right? You can always improve it. I think, I work with neuroscientists a lot, and I feel that there are just so much we don't know about human interaction. We don't even know what we're trying to capture, right? So yeah, so basically a lot, the more the better. But obviously there's a balance, yeah.
Okay, and Robert Bellerman asks, I think this is the inevitable question. I was wondering about the uncanny valley. Did you find that your test subjects are in any way influenced by that?
I don't think, I think with the medical doctors, no. And also I think the avatars we use are not really that realistic. I would think, it's basically before you actually dive in the uncanny valley. And also I think there is as I said, there is a sort of balance between appearance and behavior realism. I think because we used mostly motion captured data and we use not super realistic avatars, I think the experience overall is quite believable. Yeah, so I think uncanny valley, the sort of most fascinating example I see is really the Japanese robotics. They created this really human-like character, like human-like robot, but then as soon as she starts moving, it's creepy because she's not moving in a human-like way, right? But I don't think any of our avatars, when you look at them, you would confuse them with a real human. No, I don't think so.
Thanks. Florian Wideness says, fascinating talk. Actually, there's many who say that, probably may not get to all of them. Fascinating talk. Thank you for that. My question is, what do you think, how bad or unrealistic is good enough for a virtual human? Relates to the previous question.
I would say that it's very much about the application you're actually working on, right? So with medical doctors, I think, what problem you're trying to solve is the question. For medical doctors, they need to practice before they actually have the rare opportunity to practice it with an actor, right? So in that case, the level of realism we use is definitely good enough for them. But if you're going immersive gaming, I think people, especially if you're sort of associated with the Peaky Blinder branding, and you probably want to go for something more realistic. But I think that's very much a creative choice as well. Yeah.
Thanks. Dorothy Cowie says, great talk, Sylvia. Just wondering, have you checked that training or practice in VR will transfer to the real world? So, for example, the actual propensity to prescribe antibiotics.
That is, whatever is in the real world is really hard to measure. You probably know as well. And I think we actually did a proposal. I think we were saying that we want to try to measure that by actually looking at the overall antibiotics prescription before and after we actually provided training, but we didn't get them funding, so we haven't measured that. But that just want to say that in order to get that kind of data, you do need like quite a sort of big partnership and quite a long time as well, because you're talking about maybe collecting data for a year from different medical organizations, and then maybe run VR experiment for a year and then collect data for another year. So that's like a 3-year project you probably are looking at, right? So yeah, so I would love to do that, but yeah, if I'm funded.
Thanks. This is from Shu Wei, who I think I know. She was in Barcelona a few weeks ago, or a few months ago now. She says, what do you think is the next doable step to better leverage the user expression to build the emotional intelligent avatar, especially for training and social engagement?
Well, I think we don't even understand gaze that much. Gaze is the easiest thing to measure, right? So, you know, this is even before facial expressions. So my problem with facial expressions, because I'm very much into creating the experience that actually works in real time in VR. And inevitably, basically, participant will be wearing a headset, which make collection of facial expression really difficult. There are all sorts of new ways of collecting facial expressions inside a headset, but they're probably, most of them still kind of works at the research level rather than, you know, at a consumer level. So I think gaze, you know, just simply where you're looking at and your sort of slight head movement, even these two together, there's so much sort of we can play with. So I'm not very sort of in a hurry to see what's next. And actually, I think I try to avoid mention the word emotion. And so for the conferences I've been to in sort of affective computing, intelligent virtual agent, I think there's definitely a big sort of hype on the word emotion in the industry. But actually, we all know that in VR, or even just in general, it's really, really hard to measure emotion. And what you actually detect is facial expression, but facial expression is very deliberate, right? And some people might be showing exactly the facial expression, but they might be using that, or the facial muscle configuration, I shall say, to express very different emotions. You know, sometimes pain and pleasure could look exactly the same, right? So I'll be very careful on that and stick to very basic sort of inputs as you know, we were doing user engagement level rather than anything that's too emotional. So for me, it's really low, these low level features I'm really interested in.
There's another question, which actually a follow-up from Shu Wei. Do you think it's more of a hardware challenge to collect the facial expressions when they're in the headset, or content creation?
I think it's a bit of both, but for me, I'm probably, as I said, I think there's so much just in gaze and the head tracking that you can have already. There's already a lot to play with. I really think apart from these two, everything else, there's so much individual differences as well. So for me, I think I'll focus on the second rather than the first. But again, you don't know. Maybe there's something really interesting coming out. I mean, HTC is already doing the tracking of the eye, also tracking of the lips as well. I think these two in combination will be giving us really interesting data.
Okay. How are you for doing some more, answering some more questions?
Yeah, I can do until, do another 10, 15 minutes. No problem.
Okay, here's a more relaxing one. How did this is from Yusra Magdi. How did you get into this field of work? So interesting.
You should be answering this question, Mel. How did you get me? Yeah, so I think it's, I met Mel in 2004, and he was very good at convincing us that VR is, actually there is a story as well. So I came to the UK 2004, and I basically, you know, came from China, did my undergraduate there, and I really struggled with understanding English and speaking English when I just arrived. Mel probably remember that time as well. So I started kind of avoiding going to social situations because it's quite scary when you don't speak the language. And that's when Mel proposed to me, hey, why don't we use VR to help people who have social anxiety? And I was like, oh, that sounds very interesting. I think I otherwise wouldn't have cared, because being a quite confident person, I was like, oh, people who are anxious, you know, it's not my problem, it's their problem. But at the time I was actually experiencing some of those kind of anxieties myself in my life. And I realized actually when I'm anxious, that only make me go to social situations less. And the less I go, the less I practice, the less anxious I become. So I feel VR is a good way to actually break this loop. And I think during my PhD, I just started reading a lot about psychology and found it really fascinating, you know, how the way we behave, basically, especially in an interpersonal communication setting.
Thanks. Jordan Charles asks, any advice for someone trying to go into training people to be more resilient, to people who have greater patience or empathy and be better prepared to make healthier choices in the future? I have a bachelor's and I'm looking if I need a degree, and if so, what should I do and where?
Let me just try to understand this better. Training people to be more resilient.
Yes.
People who have great patience, or
in order for them to have greater patience or more empathy or be better prepared. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, well, there's already a lot of people doing it. Just read up the psychology literature. There already, I'm not a well, I'm half psychologist. There are full psychologists out there who have great papers on this. And I think probably number one is to really understand existing literature in training, how people do it in real life, before you actually just be in a hurry to try to do a VR version of it, and work with experts in this area, really.
Thanks. Patrick Dickinson asks, when you are designing behaviors for virtual characters in experiments, do you consider how the gender of the participant may affect the interaction? And if so, how?
Again, this is very much application-based question. So for the social psychotherapy one, we kind of just designed a scenario where we had a really cheerful woman who basically started, asking the participant very intimate questions. And in that case, we only recruited straight male participants because that's kind of the dimension we were looking at. But for the medical doctors one, I don't think it matters very much, because I think medical students are all very much trained to be unbiased, to be, not gender biased in that way. But obviously, depends on the application you're looking at. Maybe for this gaming one, I think if we're able to collect data from both female and male players, I think that'll be very interesting. And actually, we have some data. We might look at the gender difference as well. I don't think we found any yet, but we might, once we have more data, we'll be able to look at it.
Thanks. Daniel Salamanca says, do you think that you can use VR to really change or improve the behavior of people? From my work and your work, I see that he says, from Mel Slater's work and your work, I see that the users become aware of what they do, maybe feel good or bad at the moment, but will the effect last?
I think that is something, again, Mel, you should answer that, because you actually done a follow-up study on with the racial bias when that participant came in 2 weeks after they're embodied in a dark-skinned avatar, and they actually still they maintained this reduced racial bias. And I think for the medical doctor one, that's probably a more, I think actually we ran some follow-up. I don't remember the results, sorry. I think we did did a questionnaire study afterwards and asking how they think about. But again, it's really hard to actually measure people's behavior as a sort of a focus group. You really have to kind of look at, if you've done 100 doctors, how are these 100 doctors statistically behave before VR, and how do they behave afterwards, right? Because, it's about antibiotics prescription and child abuse. These are not things that happen every day, right? So the chances are these 100 doctors go back and actually confronted with a situation like that is quite rare. But still, the important thing is exactly because it's rare, they have to be really prepared for it, because when they have 1 or 2 cases, that's when it's really important. The antibiotics one is probably slightly easier. You can, as I said, run probably a 3-year study to have an understanding of how this will actually improve their behavior or not. But the child abuse one is really, really tricky.
Thanks. There is a question from Ronan Baulick, who says, great talk, I have a question. Do you have a preference about using a head-mounted display or cave in your studies? Again,
I don't have a preference, but basically there are different systems that serves different functions. So for instance, for the medical doctor one's antibiotic scenario, we worked with HMD. So we were able to, at the time, we didn't have any standalone system or anything. It was 2013, 14 when we conducted the study. So we basically have to have the system. We didn't even have a laptop which can actually run VR at the time. So we just packed everything in a suitcase and go to medical doctors' practice place and actually did the experiment there. But then with the second study, we decided to do it in a cave, and it was take quite a lot of effort to actually recruit participants to go over there. But then the upside is that they then have access to a computer, which they always have in their everyday consultation, and they found that a really important factor. So yeah, I think it really depends on recruitment, depends on application, and also depends on technical constraints, really.
Okay, thanks. I've left the most difficult question till last. It is, What is the most important difference between? That's it. That's the question.
What?
And yeah, there's a question
Okay.
there. It says, what is the most important difference between? But it doesn't say anything more. So
Okay.
you can use that to do any summary that you'd like to say.
Yeah, no, I guess, as I said, I think the summary is really, I see after 2015, there are lots of people very interested in VR, and there are lots of amazing applications, and I feel it's really important when you're actually talking about training and therapy and education. It is really about reproducing real life experiences. I mean, okay, there are applications who, you kind of have to press lots of buttons. It's still probably better than doing things on the pen and paper or on a 2D screen, right? But if you're just getting people go in and press lots of buttons as part of your social interaction, you're really not using the full capacity of VR, and that's just such a shame. And as a VR researcher, I started try to reproduce this kind of natural interaction, and now seeing lots of people doing applications that just not very doesn't use the illusions, right? So I just feel that, hey, this is VR. Of course, you can do amazing work here, but be aware there are those other things you can do as well. So if you have tried an VR application and felt, oh, this is amazing, but you start interacting with it, so okay, it doesn't really work that well. It might not be because VR doesn't work. It's because there are better ways to make VR work that people are not using. And also, I think I really benefited a lot, as I said, from working with domain experts, right? So you can't be like an expert for everything. If you're designing application for a certain problem, there are domain experts who've been dealing with it for decades. So really work with them, try to have a conversation, try to make yourself understandable from their perspective. And that's really when you have really interesting results.
Thanks. And when will I be able to become a member of the Peaky Blinders?
I think that's probably, actually, I don't know. I think maybe another year. I don't know when they're releasing it. Sorry, can't answer that question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, there is one more question. Are you up to it?
Okay, yeah, let's do one more.
Okay, this is a really general question, not related to your field study. Do you know anything about VR use with children? How old should they be before they use a head-mounted display?
Yeah, so I think there are, as the question pointed out itself, it has a psychological and physiology impact. I think, lots of parents are really worried about children using VR, more in the sense that they are worried about their eyesight. And I'm not a medical doctor, I don't really know much about it, but I'm worried about it myself as well. I wouldn't want my children to be in VR headsets for like half an hour every day. I don't know what that is going to do to them physiologically. But at the same time, I think the psychological effect, I just don't think we understand enough. I've heard there were studies about putting children in headsets, and they realized when you're actually under the age of 12, and when you're given certain tasks to do in VR and also in real life, sometimes you don't really remember which one you have done in VR, which one you have done in real life. So I think this is a question as much as for understanding the children's usage of VR, but also everybody's usage of VR, right? So VR is a great tool. It can really, change our cognition, enhance our skills and everything. But at the same time, it is doing so because it's like a sharp knife. If it's in the correct hands in the surgeon, then they can operate and take whatever is wrong of you. But if in the wrong hands, it can also cause damage. And so I'm actually quite worried about it. So I think there has to be more study really understanding the psychological impact VR actually has on people.
Yes, that was from Daniel Salamanca, and there's a final comment from Lucia, who says many thanks for the excellent talk, and there's several comments like that.
Thank you.
I just on the very last point, I think we're going to be adding another panel in this series right at the end on ethics in virtual reality. So we will try to address those kind of issues. So thanks again for a very excellent talk. And I wish you could hear everyone clapping, and we'll have to end now. Thank you for all the attendees.